Welcome everyone. June 2nd, we're here with McGill University Press and the Redpath Museum, and we are sharing a conversation between friends, a conversation about a book. We are located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. McGill respects, honors, and acknowledges these nations as the traditional custodians of the lands and the waters on which we meet, work, play, gather, share information, exchange insights, help one another. If you don't live in what we call Montreal, I encourage you to go to native-land.ca, native-land.ca, a website to learn about all the nations, territories, cultural traditions, languages across Turtle Island. My friend Laura Jean Cameron from Queen's University wrote this book, Friend Beloved. McGill Queen's University Press published it, and we're here tonight to share some of our stories, the stories that came out of the book she wrote.
Thanks, Ingrid. Thanks to everyone who is joining us. I know it's bedtime, I think, in Shrewsbury and Manchester. And I know 6:30 a.m. in Australia. Sincere thanks. This book explores the nature of connections, of interrelationships, of friendships. And at the same time, it wouldn't exist without them. So it's really great to have this chance to express gratitude for that and to everyone involved. The letters come from the British Library, and thanks very much to the Eccles Center that gave me a chance to find them. And in many ways, the work connects to the work I've been doing on the history of British ecology and science. But it also, and very meaningfully to me, connects back to questions that I first began asking almost 30 years ago when I was learning about the drainage of the valley where I grew up, Sumas Lake, in Stalo territory out on the west coast of Canada. Some of my work transcribing the letters and thinking about them and contextualizing them, some of that work happened on the territories of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. So thank you. Haichka. And here I am right now in Kingston, Cataraqui, and a lot of work went on here as well. Here I am on the territories of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, Miigwech, Nyawa. Looking out my window right now, I feel very connected to things, particularly through a tree that my mom planted out there, a blaze maple 15 years ago. My ancestors that I'm connected to also decimated trees. Indeed, a good deal of the white pine in the Ottawa Valley. And these were ancestors to the Algonquin. I keep a piece of white pine close to keep me alive to the possibilities and responsibilities of our relations and our entanglements. McGill Queen's University Press published that book I mentioned on Sumas Lake. It was my first book, and it is wonderful, again, meaningful to be working with them on Friend Beloved. Our universities and our museums are being called to recognize connections to troubling origin stories, ties to the colonial project, to racial science. They're called to become sites of reckoning, recomposition, redress, hopefully repair. Now, I first met Ingrid Berker when I showed up at the Redpath a few years ago, asking her to show me, to let me hold and touch the fossils connected with Mari Stopes and the fern ledges. And it's been an honor learning from her and learning together how tracing the journeys of fossils can unearth frequently unsettling histories of relationships with the earth and with each other. Tonight, Ingrid and I are very excited to be joined by my nephew, the actor Andrew Cameron, who'll be doing readings of some of the letters. Andrew Cameron is an actor originally from Bowen Island, BC. He's an alumnus of the McGill's Players Theatre, and after training at George Brown Theatre School, he has worked professionally in Toronto and in many theatres across the country. With his dramatic reading, we wanted to give you a sense of what's in the book. But as we've been working on this collaboration and experimenting, Andrew's work bringing the material to life has given me a different sense of what's in the book too. So thanks, Andrew. It also occurs to me that the form is perhaps not all that experimental, and that Mari Stopes didn't just write letters and scientific papers. She was constantly attempting to turn her life into plays and novels and poems, and also transpose her plays and the plots of her novels into life. So first, a bit of a brief background on the Dramatus Personae. As in the book on Sumas Lake, the mosquito gets a role here. I've always thought that an important role of history and geography is to be pesky, to remind us of things, to be, to make us uncomfortable, to bite. So big thanks to Cecily Taylor, who designed this mosquito on the cover and much of the artwork inside the book. So who is Mari Stopes and who's Gordon Hewitt? Back in the fall of 2015, I was doing some research in the British Library and unexpectedly came across a series of letters between friends. One was Mary Carmichael Stopes, a British paleobotanist and a feminist, who some years after writing these letters found international fame as a birth control advocate. She would also become increasingly involved in the horrifically misguided eugenics movement, along with many other public figures of her day, such as Canada's famous five, Winston Churchill and George Bernard Shaw. She would become a correspondent with literary figures like Shaw and as well H.G. Wells. Mari became friends with this man on the right, Charles Gordon Hewitt, at Manchester University, where she was lecturing. She was the first woman to lecture there in the sciences. Hewitt, first a student and then a colleague, was rapidly becoming an expert on insects, particularly the housefly. At age 24, he got a job with Canada's settler colonial government as Dominion entomologist. And he became one of Canada's trailblazers of nature conservation before he died in the Spanish flu epidemic at just age 35. And that was a century ago. The two had much in common: love of theater, ambition, privilege, but also an interest in the new science of ecology. In the letters, they talk about many things, the universe and everything, as well as their collaborative scientific work. This is their joint paper that they wrote together. It was what Hewitt called the one little sin. They also wrote a couple of acclaimed books. Mari wrote Married Love, a guide basically to good sex from a woman's perspective, that was banned in the United States for 20 years, but nonetheless became an international bestseller. The conservation of the wildlife of Canada was Hewitt's effort, much less famous, but it also had some international celebrity. A British reviewer said it was one of the first books in the world to impartially and scientifically take stock of what the world has lost and is losing over one of its largest national areas. Though seemingly wildly different in terms of topic, there's some interesting connections and resonances between them. They both are about saving lives, increasing happiness, but the question of whose life, whose happiness, was something that was very much for them entangled in certain hierarchies and prejudices. Now, the letters between Stopes and Hewitt were written before these books were published, from places in England, Japan, and Canada. This is an example of Hewitt's writing. Here's an example of Stopes's. They're just a small part of Stopes's bequest to the British Library. But materials connected to Stopes and Hewitt were actually in many other collections. And there was lots left for me to find, locate. And I want to give a shout out here to all the wonderful curators, archivists who helped me find so many things. And special shout out, David Gelsthorpe, I think is here from Manchester University. Thank you so much. Thank you also. Some of the material I found were in private archives in places such as the attic of Mary Stopes Rowe, Stopes's daughter-in-law who passed 2 years ago. And I'm endlessly grateful to the kindness of people like Mary who opened their homes to me and took me up to their attics. Thank you. Several of the photographs I'm going to show are actually from her attic. Other characters I need to briefly introduce, just 3 more, and then we get to Andrew. The Canadian doctor, Helen Mcmurchie. She had a meeting with Stopes on Stopes's first trip to Canada. And this was a very brief but intense meeting. At the time, Mcmurchie was well on her way to becoming one of Canada's most prominent eugenicists. The friendship between Hewitt and Stopes was facilitated by the fact, in part, that they were both involved in other relationships. Here's Dr. Kenjiro Fuji. Mari had met him in Germany, and they had marriage plans. But these plans disintegrated when she traveled to Japan for 2 years of research. This is a photograph by Hewitt, and it's a picture of Fuji up in a pine tree. Now, here is the last character I need to introduce you to, Molly Mcnichol, a talented scientist who was engaged to be married to Hewitt. In recalling the friendship between Hewitt and Stopes, something that really intrigued me was the way that the letters appear to be bound up with Stopes's ideas about men's and women's equality. Stopes was a feminist, a staunch feminist and suffragette, as was her mother. With the correspondence, it seems Stopes was attempting to enact her theory that a friendship of equality between men and women was not only possible, but an evolutionary imperative. The first letter Andrew will be reading is not to Hewitt, but to the Times on behalf of the suffrage movement and on women's right to vote. The date is December 1909.
There are in the country thousands of women who not only want the vote, but who are absolutely determined to get it. And they will get it. Behind them is working an invincible power stronger than any opposition, the force of evolution. It is an unnatural and ridiculous thing that men and women who are made to love and help each other should fight as they are forced to do at present. And the cost of the fight is a terrible drain on national resources. It is clear as the vote for women has to come, the sooner a stop can be put to the degrading struggle to get it, the better.
Thanks, Andrew. 9 years later, in 1918, British women over 30 won the right to vote after a very long and hard-fought struggle. In Canada, that same year, some women got the vote. 1945 was the year Asian women were permitted to vote. It was 1960 for Indigenous women. I'd like to set the context for the next letter. Stopes has gone to Japan for 2 years to study petrified angiosperms and to search for a missing link ancestor to flowering plants. Remember, both Hewitt and Stopes are betrothed to other people. Hewitt is in Manchester and he writes to Stopes, who's now in Japan.
My dear Miss Stopes, You really are too good to me after I had treated you so badly by not writing before this. During the last 6 or 12 months, I have entirely lost my good character as a good correspondent. Even Molly has had to complain of neglect. I can only say I haven't wasted the time otherwise. However, I will try to slightly redeem, if possible, my lost character. It was not because I had forgotten you. I thought too much of you for that, and I really missed you. I know you won't mind my saying that, and will understand. I saw the first 2 parts of your journal, but missed the 3rd and 4th. Ms. Wilkinson also posted me up in your doings while the father of the flittermice was in America. And now I'm going to thank you for the things you sent. Thank you so much. The links are very pretty, and I think a great deal about them. You must have been to a lot of trouble to get me the flies. I never thought of receiving such a complete collection. They are really very interesting and form an important part of my collection. Unfortunately, as you anticipated, most of them were more interesting to a mycologist than a zoologist. That is the worst of such creatures. Nevertheless, I managed to pick out several specimens from each lot, which, though fungiferous, were recognizable and quite good as one could expect after the distance traveled. I envy you being in such surroundings. The insect fauna of Japan must be very fine, and a striking contrast to the somber, almost insignificant fauna of this country. Fancy having such a beautiful mantis as the one you sent in one's room. If at the risk of emulating Oliver Twist, I might reply yes to your very kind offer to supply me with more flies. I should be more indebted to your kindness than ever. I should be most interested to have specimens of Japanese houseflies with town and country specimens, if possible. I think they could travel much better as regards to freedom from fungi if they were put in cotton wool and small card boxes of any kind instead of glass tubes. I have found that in either glass or tin, the conditions are moist and favorable for fungi. But this is all deadly uninteresting, and I haven't told you any news yet, as a matter of fact. I really don't know where to begin unless I begin as early as I can. As you will have heard from Evelyn about most people, I will be exclusive. Almost egotistical.
Ingrid, I know that gave you thoughts of...
It makes me giggle still. I think he's really trying hard to impress her that he is a legitimate scientist, and she has supplied him with some pretty spectacular items, but still he wants to let her know, pack them a little more carefully, and perhaps you could, I have found in my great experience that perhaps this would be a better way to avoid fungus growing on bugs. Beautiful. That would have been an amazing supply of exotic bugs coming, from, I know she went to mountain ranges in Japan where no one had ever been before and collected specimens that had never been found before. So taking the time to send them to her buddy and her scientific friend, her beloved friend, wherever he was, would have taken a lot of effort. So I still like that. I like they're establishing the terms of their scientific collegiality, and where they kind of, rank scientifically as academics, as scientists, as field scientists.
That's right. He's just 22, and she's 5 years older than him, and she's been his teacher as well. So there's certainly that going on, and that reference, introduces a theme of the correspondence all about egoism. It's something that's very important. Thanks. Then the next letter is from Stopes in Japan to Hewitt. She has just gotten word that he has broken his engagement with their mutual friend, Molly Mcnichol.
I got a letter from Dr. Hoyle the other day via Siberia, so written not very long ago. And he mentions 2 facts with no details, for he said he knew more and did not like to go on, as you say. He told me your cough is serious and that your betrothal is broken. Don't think me cruel to write of it. I do so hoping it may, in a way, ease you a little, for I remember so well when I was in agony how thoughtful everyone was to avoid speaking of my sorrow so that no one touched the subject, and how all the time I was aching with the loneliness of it and longed for someone to lay their hand on mine and say, "Tell me all about it." I have been through 2 terrible times in my life. One of them I am not quite through, I fear, and I would do anything I could to save you from what I suffered. All I can do is write a letter. It won't save you anything, but if you feel as I have felt, it may do a little towards a substitute for the talk I ached for. Perhaps I am foolish to write without knowing more of the details. Your health seems to me less serious than the broken betrothal, though I fancy it will be the cause of it. Of course, you will get well. Don't listen to the croaking nonsense of doctors. You, with your strong body, will conquer any ridiculous little bacteria that may have fancied it a suitable abode. Go in for fresh air and sunshine. An easy prescription in Manchester, isn't it? Cold water and milk, and you will be all right. My father was about 25 when he was told one lung was completely gone. He died of something else 25 years later, and all his life, his voice and lungs were the most splendidly powerful I ever knew. It is the broken betrothal for which I grieve. Of course, if she thinks it right to break it and chooses to do so, then I can say nothing but for you the deepest sympathy. But if you, out of any mistaken notions of chivalry, are breaking it, I have very much to say to you. Don't do it. Don't. To a woman who deeply loves a man, a broken betrothal is as death itself. Indeed, it is worse, for death, we believe, means either dreamless sleep or an all-embracing comprehension. But a broken betrothal is an endless agony of pain, of constant little reminding pains that turn very simple daily duty and pleasure into torture. What matter if, supposing an impossibly bad case, you were to die a month, even a day, after you were married? That month, that day, are so precious they cannot be spared of your lives. Do you remember Isolde, flying to the man she loves to die in his dead arms? A great love is so much greater than any mere incident of physical sickness or death, and at the same time is so dependent on the physical form of the beloved that it is torture to think of him sick or dying outside one's arms. I speak as a woman, but Tristan, you remember, had only the thought of Isolde on his deathbed, longed only for her coming. Nothing is great enough to interfere with great love. I do not know, of course, how strong your love was, but I fancied I saw in your face the promise of a great and beautiful love, and it has hurt me to think of it lying with broken wings. I love lovers so.
She refers in that letter to attending the Halle Theatre in Manchester and watching Tristan and Isolde, which they would have done maybe as a group together, a group of friends. It's important just to underline here that the context is that she too is having relationship troubles with Kinjiro Fuji. Hewitt then replies, defending his actions.
Now with regard to myself. In the first place, I find that my reticence has produced misunderstanding. I have no tubercular trouble whatever. Through overwork, one of my lungs, which about 9 years ago suffered from emphysema, instead of healing up, releasing out as it should have done had I taken the necessary precautions, instead of imbued with an intense love of my work, which kept me from all outdoor exercise, has not done so, but is practically all fibrous tissue, so that I really have only one lung to get on with. But there is no tubercular disease about. I have a cough, the result of pleuris degeneration. As I am, no insurance office would accept my life. Some might, with a huge premium, impossible for a person in my position to pay. You know and are well aware of the fact that it is considered that a man should not marry if he can't insure, under such circumstances as mine. Consequently, when after my illness in the spring and my feeling of crookedness, I laid the case before Miss Mcnichol and asked to be released. You must know by this time that everyone does not think like you do about these things. I wish more people did. You are an idealist, and things are viewed from a practical point of view. which being the case, one has to conform with the prevalent spirit. I hate conventions as much as anyone, but they are a necessary adjunct of the present state of affairs. It would be a risk for any girl to marry me, and I am unwilling that they should take on the risk, even if they wish to do so. My action may be regarded as selfish. If so, I cannot help it. This Mcnichol is young and attractive, and if men are what I take them to be, she will not remain a spinster all her life. As for me, I have rescinded the greatest joy one can have, that of a mate. My work is now my mate, and with it I am very happy. So if you love lovers such, you can still love me and my work. I have quite got over the first shock of the catastrophe, and Miss Mcnichol too, for all appearances. You may say I didn't really love her, which opinion I cannot help. I must leave this letter as it is time to go, and I want to leave the subject. I dislike skeletons and ghosts.
So Hewitt is now mated with his work. Shifting gears, Stopes has now left Japan and is on her way back to England via Canada. She's doing this cross-country rail trip, and she stops in Toronto where she gives some talks, and she becomes quite a celebrity in Canada at this time. She meets Dr. Helen Mcmurchie, who is quickly besotted by the young academic.
My darling, that is what I have been wanting to call you ever since the express took you away from me to Montreal. In that moment, I knew I loved you. When I found it in my heart to take you into my arms and kiss you, it hurt my heart all day, every day, that I had to let you go till your dear letter came on Tuesday. Do you think you will ever know how glad I was to get it? Pleased. You touched a very appreciative spot in any Toronto heart when you liked us better than Montreal. We amuse ourselves with these little rivalries. I was so glad you saw my dear gifted Dr. Abbott and Dr. Adami, and I did appreciate your remarks on Professor Penello. I know people also are like that. You shall call me Minky, or anything you will. I think Minky is quite pretty. Was it the fur on my little Canadian coat that gave me my name with you? I meant to tell you that the Peterborough muskrat from which the coats are made is a kind of beaver, Castor canadensis. So you see, it is real Canadian. Well, you really have me, dear. I am so glad I am old enough to be your adopted mother. I can give you, or rather, you have it already, the love I would have given my own children. And it will be all yours. No one to share it with you. To have got you crowns all. You have got me, dear, and what a sweet thing that you knew that you had got me, and were a little glad about it. It must be goodbye. And I was the only person who kissed you in Canada. My darling, what am I to call you? Ever yours affectionately, Helen Mcmurchie.
There's a lot to unpack there, but Ingrid and I will try and be brief. As Squaw Sue says, some friends seem to complete us, others complicate us. And the letter gives us an opportunity to talk about Stopes's complex sexual identity. Biographers have written about her bisexuality, but as well, there's uncomfortable and real links between the feminist movement and the eugenics movement that we need to highlight. Mcmurchie was, at this point, the inspector of the feeble-minded for Ontario. We'll be listing some resources at the end for follow-up on these things, but maybe just to briefly mention, you know, in the eugenics movement, there were people who followed it across the political spectrum, and Mcmurchie and Stopes didn't agree eye to eye on a lot of things. Mcmurchie was against working mothers and against birth control, and that was something that Stopes they wouldn't have agreed on that. Then the letter also mentions Dr. Penello, whom Stopes visited at the Redpath Museum, her first 3 visits to the museum. It also mentions Dr. Maud Abbott. And I know all these people, Penello, Maud Abbott, these are people really familiar to you, Ingrid.
Yeah, they are. And it turns out that Mcmurchie knew Abbott. Maud Abbott was Canada's leading cardiologist. She was the first person to discover and write about the arrhythmia in the heart. She was respected for her clinical abilities. She was the lead pathologist. She ran the pathology museum, which is where the students, the medical students, had to go to dissect cadavers, look at dissected parts of cadavers that Maud, as the pathologist, Maud Abbott, would have mounted and stored in, liquid display structures, so that, and every little item, every artery, every little structure is labeled in Maud's writing. She even took that to the World Exhibition. That she took a massive amount of material in France. It was held in 1936. Mcmurchie also, Penelot, Professor Penelot, she talks about him. She says, I know people like him. 1909, he was probably already quite ill at this point. He was the chair of biology at McGill. Carrie Derrick, a friend of Maud Abbott's, the first person to teach evolution in Canada. Also a doctor. All three were medical doctors. All three had gone to McGill University, accepted women as early as 1884. But a profession to go further as a woman, if you wanted to be involved in science, you first became a doctor, a medical doctor. And then McGill didn't offer women a place in McGill's medical college until 1919. So many of them went to bishops. They went to bishops, all three of them. They would have known each other. They would have been involved, aside from their academic studies, in lots and lots of socially active groups. There was a suffragette movement. I think they actually founded it. It was called the Montreal League of Women. Penelot wasn't very supportive of women in positions in academia the last 12 years of his life. Carrie Derrick ran the department without any recognition or pay because Dr. Penelot was quite ill, sick. There's, I did look up Helen Mcmurchie because the name rang a bell. 10 years after this letter, she publishes in Maclean's, which was a very respected magazine out of Toronto, Anglo-Canadian origins, published for the family, for the home. Maclean's, a mixture of news, columns, and advice. And her article was, I think it was titled, Why Did 24 Children Have to Die in Toronto? And it was all about this unprecedented but alarming to her number of kids that got killed by motorists. Kids running out into streets or not knowing that there was, these drivers were driving way too fast was her main point. Her second point was that it wasn't regulated. And her basic recommendation at the end of the letter, this is 1919, is that maybe they should really have a bylaw to specify that there are residential areas where children still, children played on the streets. That's where the life of the community was, not motorists. For a long time, it was very easy to, your home would be adjacent to the roadway. And the roadway was very much a playing ground, a ground where people walked. Sidewalks were not hurt. They're late. They don't show up until the end, till the residential neighborhoods after World War II are built. I also looked her up. She had a long life. She was very active right into 1941. She's hosting a huge family reunion. And she's the one who is presiding and talking about the importance of family, close family, but also family in a very strong, sense of community, that Anglo-Canadian feeling. It's highly respected.
Definitely full of contradiction. Certainly, she had a lot of care for some people, but for others, especially, Eastern European women who she targeted as being prone to feeble-mindedness, it was all about institutionalization, sterilization, it's this, very hard mix. Okay, hard to shift gears again here, but in terms of the next letter, which is from Hewitt, Stopes returns to England, and her relationship with Hewitt intensifies greatly, though he's also betrothed to another woman, the artist Edith Garner. But then he gets a job in Canada, and maybe he's excited about Stopes's descriptions of what Canada was like. He applies for this job as Dominion entomologist, a big job, and he gets it. And he prepares to leave England.
Thanks so much, well-beloved. My first part is packed up with my other books. I will get the second and subsequent. If we could live as we feel we ought, life would be life. But here we are, or most of us, and we have to make the best of it. We can try to make that best good. I am happy that I made that vow to you. It shall be kept were I to live as I am, as I may. I wonder. It would be the solution of so many difficulties, and yet it is so lonely at times. Have you ever read Ibsen's Love's Comedy? Read it. I'd rather like parts of it. My books are packed, nailed, banded with iron, labeled, and ready to go. Gott sei Dank, as ever, CGH.
And then things get messy very quickly. And the upshot of it is that Hewitt seems to be asking Stopes to propose to him because he doesn't have the nerve to do it himself. So Stopes proposes. Hewitt, at first, agrees, and then he refuses.
To C.G. Hewitt. I have not asked you to write, so there was no call whatever for you to say what you do in your last letter of June 17th on May 18th. I asked you to let me see all my own letters, which request repeatedly by cable you have had the discourtesy to disregard. Since my childhood, I have never prayed for my daily bread or forgiveness for trespass, but only and often to understand. The one way for me to understand this unimaginable situation is to go through all our letters carefully. Now I can judge both you and myself. Then I may rest. Why do you withhold them from me? I will return them, if you wish. Why give me the wanton, needless pain of both keeping from me the one thing that can satisfy my need? Knowing as I do how tragically pitiful life is, how should I let even that make a barrier against so rare and precious a thing as tender and comprehensive friendship? But unacknowledged love is different. MCS.
And then things get even messier. Stopes makes a snap decision to marry someone else, the Canadian geneticist Reginald Ruggles Gates. Both he and Mcmurchie witnessed the marriage. It's at the Windsor Hotel in Montreal. The married couple returns to England, and the marriage is an instant disaster. Gates is not a feminist. He's threatened by Stopes's energy. And still, Stopes is compelled to return to Canada and to Hewitt's orbit. So this sets the scene for the final selected letter and Stopes's contribution to resolving one of Canada's major geological controversies, the age of the fern ledges in New Brunswick. Something that, Ingrid knows much more about than I.
I have just received your letter of July 22nd, and I'm very glad to hear that the collection of fossils from the Peter Redpath Museum has proved to be of such interest, and that you have been able to study the material so thoroughly. We shall be glad to have you return the collection as soon as convenient, and shall also feel much indebted if you will add the names assignment to the specimens by Sir William Dawson, the correct designations as determined by your later study. Best wishes for Dr. Gates and yourself.
So this letter was from Frank Dawson Adams of the Redpath Museum to Maury Stopes. And over to you, Ingrid.
He's talking, he's letting her know. So Frank Dawson Adams was the designated director at the Redpath Museum, and that's what this 3D slide shows you. And it really does have a blue ceiling like that, sky blue ceiling that was designed that way. It's the oldest museum in Canada, built in 1882. Really did want to, the person who designed it was John William Dawson, Canada's leading Victorian scientist, wrote hundreds of books and articles about, mainly about the evolution of plants and animals, fossils that he collected, described, and understood. He was the only trained microscopist in the whole country. Probably influenced hundreds and thousands of students, young scientists for a long time. He was at McGill for 44 years, died in the saddle. He had first described those plant fossils that Mari Stopes came here to check out. She was commissioned to do this. It was an appointment from the Geological Survey of Canada. The director of the survey asked her to please take charge, come here, go to Fern Ledges, which is in New Brunswick, and most of the collection there is kept at, still to this day, at the New Brunswick Museum. That's a provincial museum in St. John. And then the Dawson material. Dawson had collected it from Fern Ledges, from St. John, New Brunswick, from various localities before coming to McGill. So these are some of the earliest collections. If we go to the next slide, and you can get a sense of what this material looked like. This is a specimen in that small photograph. It's black. It is completely mineralized. It is, I'm going to hold up its partner. This isn't the one that's in that photo, but this is a partner to it, collected in the same site, has a slightly different number. And this labeling is from Dawson, and as well as the original 4 numbers there. Those are catalog numbers that he would have put in his hand, his writing with a quill pen in white, because it's a black specimen. It's quite strong, I mean, quite heavy. It's not going to break. It's all mineralized. This was a plant. This plant was growing about 280 million years ago, when this whole area was probably a swamp, a Devonian swamp. These are the remnants of some of the world's earliest vascular land plants, the first plants to show up on land. And Dawson collected and wrote about them, and was influential. There's a letter from Charles Darwin. It's a letter we have at the museum. It's Darwin thanking Dawson for this amazing, Dawson wrote he called it a memoir. It's a 270-page document that lists all the plants, describes them, illustrates them, names them. And Darwin's thanking him for this amazing contribution to science, to our understanding of the passage, how the history of life, how it evolved on the planet. Just earlier, I didn't even realize this until we were testing for this show tonight. The back, the label on the back actually has Mari Stopes penciled in correction. So she's correcting Dawson's designation of the species. So Radiatus is the species. And in her pencil, she's erased it and put in SP. That means it just means it's a short form for indeterminate species, right? Calamites is the genus, and the next, in Latin, the next word is the species. That's how the binomial nomenclature for all plants, animals, bugs, fungus works. That was Linnaeus had figured that one out. So you are looking at material that she touched, she examined, she looked at. It is, so it's the main fossil thing here is a plant. It would have grown a height of 80 feet. This is now, the descendants of this plant are things you see in the roadside ditches, especially moist roadside ditches. It's commonly called scouring rush. Calamites equisetum are the Latin names for these species. So she did a lot of important work. I know Laura Jean, that she did want to be here to be near Canada's famous ecologist. And I understand that they were linked in very interesting ways. But what I feel is so impressive to me is she was just she was very clear-headed about her professional work. This was her specialty, paleobotanist, already established, understood what she was looking at and what she had to do. She did it. That's her label, by the way. Or well, that's not her writing. So you see in the photo, that tiny little label on the side, that is Frank Dawson Adams writing, not Devonian. She would have notified him saying, please go to specimen number so-and-so, add in now on my authority, not Devonian, that it's much later. It's from the Carboniferous.
Okay. So this is 1912, where Frank Dawson Adams is asking her to correct the specimens. So she's got some of the specimens from the Redpath over at the British Museum. And so he's asked her to correct some of them there. What strikes me is that her paper, was done. It was finished at that point. It wasn't published until 2 years later. And it seems, looking at some of that history, it was a good deal of work being done not to ruffle any male egos. So it's that is worth noting. And thanks, Ingrid. With these fossils, so much of it was about unearthing these stories along with these fossils and tracing their movements, and in unearthing, the stories and being able to then settle them in time with these dates provided by the fossils, and using the fossils to follow the social history. Things started to become clearer. Now, we might have time to take a question, Ingrid. At this point, we were going to perhaps. I just wanted to give a shout out to some people who wrote in. Mark Badham, he's a former curator at the Miller Museum. And he wrote, and he noted that, there were so many colorful scientists and stories that can be gleaned from snippets preserved in our small museums. A fact of which I was constantly reminded during my time at Queen's. So he's the former curator at the Miller. And, such a comment, underlines this fact: these objects contain stories, these things. And I wonder, Ingrid, if we have time, or maybe this notion that these objects also move, and they come back lately in museums. There's been moves to repatriate objects, and there's so much sense of that. I'm wondering what gets you excited these days, what's going on in the museums in terms of shifting the stories and using the objects to do that. And maybe not their objects anymore. Maybe in some cases they're actual beings.
Yeah, I've touched a lot of objects in this museum. I've been to lots of other museums and had tremendous privilege of being close to amazingly old material that helps us to understand how life was evolved on the planet, and the people who examined it, found it, unearthed it, brought it back to our museums, told the stories, understood the stories, brought the stories to light, made us, it is a passage. Lately, I've moved away from objects and I've gone outside, and I've established a few gardens here, pollinator gardens, close to the museum, just beside it. I'm spending a lot of time out in those gardens. I'm growing things that I didn't have a chance to be outside that much, outdoor education. So that's opened up a world that does parallel what's happening indoors here at the Redpath. I've just started to go to visit the Stones. I call it the Stones and Bike tour. And I start with the stones on the side of this building and the fossilized remains of animals that are embedded in those stones. And I head down to places like there's a black rock, a famous black rock that was pulled out of the St. Lawrence River in 1860 because these men who were building the first bridge across the St. Lawrence River, the Victoria Bridge, they, while they were preparing the entranceway to the bridge, not the actual bridge, they unearthed bones, and these were unmarked graves, mass burial site, 6,000, estimated 6,000 individuals, unnamed, probably from the 1847 typhus and cholera plagues. They were called plagues at that time. In these tenements, in these working class areas that are now the area is called Griffintown. At that time it was called Goose Village. It was the working class people, like the Irish communities were localized down there, while the Scots and Anglo communities were up here where McGill is situated. So I'm getting a sense of the stones and the bones and the feeling that it wasn't, you know, a lot was going on here at that time. Here we were teaching people, teaching them with samples in the museum, but you know, there were bones and stones being found, and they built their homes. They built their home from field stones, and in the field stones would have been the marks of the animals that lived here 450 million years before them. So that's exciting me, Laura Jean. I'm on the land. I'm exploring and learning from on site the world out there beyond the museum's walls.
Yeah. One of the questions I remember you asking, Ingrid, was how Stopes was able to travel so much.
Yeah.
How did she get to Japan? How did she get to Canada? Well, this was a question that Hewitt asked her as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he wanted to know, you know, how do you do this? How do you make it work? Well, the thing was, she was the main breadwinner for her family. After her father died young, she was responsible mainly for looking after both her mother and her sister, who was not well. And so she was very resourceful. She had a commission from the Royal Society to go to Japan, so that helped finance that. She also had a lot of patrons. People like Dr. Hoyle at the Manchester Museum would spot her some money. He was happy to help both her and her sister. So the people looking after them, there were these networks of connection sort of helping to look after her. But you might be interested to know that she got $500 Canadian for that work on the Fern Ledges. That was paid to her by the Geological Survey to solve Canada's one of their biggest geological controversies, which I understand works out to about 14,000 in 1911. That would have been
that's substantial.
Yeah. I just realized we're running out of time. I think I'm getting the head that one thing we want to do is return to Andrew.
Sure.
And one last reading. And just to quickly set this up, this actually connects to how Stopes was able to travel and exist really and work as a scholar. I mean, as she was resourceful, she wrote lots of things, as I mentioned, besides scientific papers and books. She wrote textbooks like to sell. Also, she wrote plays and novels. And unpublished novels. She wrote lots of those. Lots of things didn't get published. She was very prolific. And there's this novel, this unpublished novel entitled A Man's Mate that acts sort of as this backdrop or sounding board to the letters that go back and forth between Hewitt and Stopes and kind of mirror, you know, resound what's going on as she tries to make the plots of her novels into life and vice versa. So Andrew's going to read a selection from the novel that this is in the book. We've got a chapter from her unpublished novel entitled Friends. And there's reference here to a racial hierarchy, you'll notice, with English on top. And at the same time, a strong commitment to friendship and gender equity through the practice of science.
Do you believe in the existence of friendship between a man and a woman? Professor Lawrence put the question to Marjorie as they were walking slowly along the steep path leading up a mountainside. Professor Schmidt had brought his class out into the mountains where they could see and touch the rocks while he expounded their histories. All the seniors were there, but the way was steep, and the day warm with brilliant sunshine, and the party was broken up into a straggling line. Marjorie and Professor Lawrence, being the only English on the expedition, were naturally leading it, and as naturally led it together, for Marjorie's lightness of bearing and her swinging step made her a perfect match for Professor Lawrence with his long strides. The party behind them were lost in the landscape, and when they got too far ahead of the others, they sat down in the sunny air and waited for them in perfect content, however slowly they came. The beauty of the mountains, wreathed with films of clouds above them and skirted by the rich green pines, filled the two scientists with such satisfaction in their mere existence that they were willing to do whatever the moment suggested. Marjorie thought for a little space of seconds before replying to his query. Once I did, and then I didn't. And now? I can't answer in a word. There are certain conditions under which I think it might be possible, such as, well, if they had some absorbing common interest that was not personal in any way, and if they were neither in love nor married, nor wanting to be in love. It sounds rather impossibly difficult, I'm afraid. Marjorie laughed. What common interest do you suggest? That seems to me the difficulty. Well, I fancy that it must not be literature, for of course the best literature has very much personal sentiment. Look at our great novels and poetry. No, literature would be fatal. So would music, I think, and art, quite certainly. Why, the very essential of art is the beauty of form and the physical body. An artist couldn't get very intimate with another of the opposite sex without having strong feeling about their physical personalities. I think philanthropy might be the kind of impersonal interest I postulate. That is all a feeling for the people outside the immediate two. Or science might do. Science is the best of all, I think, as it is far the most impersonal. If they studied astronomy and contemplated the immensity of space, or bacteriology and looked into the infinitely minute forms of life, there would be nothing to cultivate a personal feeling, everything to help them lose themselves in the universe. So I suppose it could be possible, if everything was suitable, for two scientists to be real friends.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I think, oh, there we go. Lots more to discuss, lots more to unpack. I hope this has sparked some curiosity in you to follow some of these letters. Some resources to learn more about eugenics, its entangled history, interesting symposium they had recently at McGill, and ordering information. There's a discount until the 31st of August on the book. I want to thank everyone. Ingrid, thank you so much for joining me. Andrew, thank you, and happy birthday shortly, a couple days. And
thank you.
Stu McCombie, who's been behind the shifting gears. I don't know what he's doing on the YouTube end of things, but thank you, Stu. And tonight is his anniversary. He's hopefully heading right from this straight to a beautiful dinner with his loved one. And thank you, Stu. Thanks everybody for coming, and have a great morning, night, evening sleep.
And buy the book.
Oh. It really does exist. Great reading. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot from the Redpath Museum at home. Interested in Redpath Museum events? Please check out our website. Some of them you have to register for ahead of time. Most of them, almost all of them, are still free, and we look forward to coming together again. McGill Multimedia, always with us. YouTube, check it out.